Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are so delighted to have with us today Krystle Matar, author of Legacy of the Brightwash, and Angela Boord, author of Fortune's Fool, both of whom are some of my very favorite people. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. This is really exciting.
Thank you. Yes, I am excited too.
Well, before we get started on our very fun topic for today, we like to start things off with a couple of intro questions. And let's start with the moment of sunshine. Sarah, what's something great that happened this week?
So something great that happened this week is a while ago, I bought a peppercorn vine and it arrived and I repotted it and it promptly lost all of its leaves and looked like it was dead. And I discovered today that it has new leaves on it, so it lives.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, I had just left it out there kind of in the vain hopes that maybe it would revive, and it did. So clearly that worked.
Should I call on people so it's not chaotic? Or does someone have something they want to jump in with?
I think it's more likely that we'll just stare at each other awkwardly.
Well, Krystle, what's something great that happened this week?
Can I say that being on this is really exciting? I'm going to go with that. Something really great was that I was invited to do it. Actually, I invited myself. Myself to do a podcast with people that I really enjoy. So I'm going to say that's my great thing.
And we're glad you invited yourself.
Yeah, and thank you for introducing us to Angela. Always need more friends.
Yes.
It's pretty awesome. You guys are going to like her. No pressure, Angela.
No pressure.
Angela likes Inda by Sherwood Smith, so already we're besties.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do. I really do like Inda. Yes. It's one of my favorite series of all time. So
Yes, same.
that is good.
So you are a woman of impeccable taste.
Thank you. You too.
Well, Angela, what's something great that happened this week?
Well, I also am excited about being on this podcast. When Krystle told me that we should do this, I said, yes, this is a great idea. We should do it. But I guess I should say something different too. My 11-year-old found a clutch of, and this is going to sound weird, is a great thing, but it was really neat, a clutch of king snake eggs.
Ooh.
Under a tree in buried in leaves in the neighbor's yard, which is really a weird thing. They're tiny kind of leathery eggs. And, I don't think I've ever seen snake eggs before or heard about finding them. So that was a really cool, unique thing that happened this week. I kind of like nature stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Did you have to look up what kind of snake the eggs were for, or did you just know?
Yeah, so they're in the neighbor's yard, and she did. So I got a bunch of boys running in excitedly to tell me they found these eggs. There's 10 of them. We don't know what they are. They don't look like turtle eggs. You're looking them up. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. So yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. I hope you took pictures.
Yeah, she had pictures, so it was pretty cool. But at first you're like, geez, I don't know snake eggs, but king snakes are non-poisonous.
Best case scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
There are many worse options where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. You wouldn't want to leave a clutch of copperhead eggs or something underneath your front tree, but if they're king snake eggs, then it can be a cool, neat thing that happened this week.
And you, Lily, what's something good that happened to you this week?
Well, one of our friends had 2 barbecues, and now they have 1 barbecue, and we have 1 barbecue. I don't know why they had an extra one, but yeah, I'll take it. Great.
Yeah, a free barbecue.
Yeah. And they were apologizing. Oh, we're sorry. It's really dirty. You're going to have to clean it. Oh man, that is fine with me. I do not mind cleaning off a barbecue because it is hamburger weather.
For the sake of having a free barbecue, that's a easy price to pay.
Exactly. Yeah. So we did have to replace some of the inside bits because they were so rusty. But I was like, $20. That's fine.
That's still cheaper than the cost of a new barbecue.
Exactly. So I've been barbecuing everything.
As you should.
Yeah. Well, the question is usually, what are you drinking tonight? But I don't think it's actually nighttime for anybody. Well, Krystle, what are you drinking today?
I'm drinking a craft beer called Cherry Wit
Ooh.
from a brewery in Ontario. So it's cherry and citrus and wheat, and it's very good, and I like it a lot. I remembered to keep the can this time so I could tell you exactly what it was.
We appreciate it.
That sounds very intriguing.
It's a really mellow beer. Like it's not sweet. It's just mellow. So it's nice for the hot weather.
Angela, do you have a beverage with you?
Well, I'm boring. I just have iced tea, which actually didn't have much ice in it. So it's sort of lukewarm to me, but it's good.
Tea is a delightful beverage, so that's not boring at all.
Yeah. I have to switch. I drink tea in the afternoon most times, but like when it gets a little colder, I drink hot tea. And so it's, actually it's not quite 1,000,000 degrees outside today, but it's still pretty hot. So
Sarah, how about you?
I am drinking Blindwood cider because I have a lot of it and they're delicious and I love Blindwood a lot. I talk about them all the time.
Is that the brand, or is Blindwood something?
Blindwood is a local cider maker here in the Bay Area, and it's a family. It's a brother and the brother's wife and the sister, and it's just the three of them, and they hand deliver, and they're just lovely people.
That's awesome.
So I like them a lot. Yeah.
I could not decide, so I am double fisting today.
Good for you. It's Saturday, you're allowed.
I'm finishing the bottle of Basil Hayden's that I got for our earlier episode with Krystle. And because it's a really nice bourbon that I quite like, and I'm drinking that on the rocks. But I also felt like tea today, so I'm drinking Gunpowder, which is a green tea from Tandem Tea Company, which is Charles from the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. And he has some very good teas. They're all delicious.
He does have good tea.
Well, this is technically a book podcast. So anyone read anything good lately?
I just started, I'm not terribly far into it, but enough to know I like it. An Altar on the Village Green by Nathan Hall, which is an indie book. And it's pretty dark and kind of surreal, which I was not actually expecting until I read a review of it. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I really like the writing in it, and I'm curious to see where it's going. And so I'm really enjoying it. I'm hooked. I think he said it's based on, I think he took inspiration from a video game. I think it was Dark Souls, but I don't know exactly. So I don't know too much about it, and I'm going in kind of blind, but I'm definitely interested in reading on and figuring out what's going to happen, because it's kind of mysterious and really dark, but in a good way, So
Yeah, that sounds really good. Krystle, how about you?
I am not reading indie. I'm reading Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. I think my brain just needed a break from fantasy while I'm editing 1,000,000 fantasy words. So it's really good. It's so over the top that it's almost fluff. Like, I was trying to explain it to my husband, where it's like, I can almost relate because I've worked in a kitchen before, but our kitchens weren't this bad. So it's just so over the top of anything that I can even relate to, that it's just fluff, but in a really interesting and shocking and amazing way. And I'm kind of taking notes in the back of my head for Ishmael for when he gets his point of view books, because I feel like he would fit in with these people really well. Because so I'm enjoying Anthony Bourdain's book. It's really good. Not for the faint of heart, though.
No, that sounds good, though. We need to get more nonfiction on this podcast.
We have some nonfiction books that we're going to be talking about, or that we might talk about next year. We can add this.
Next year.
I
we're
scheduled,
planned out through like
Wow.
March or something horrible.
I scheduled out our calendar. Yeah. February is not my fault, though.
No.
Scheduling February was not me.
No. Well, Sarah, have you read anything good lately?
I have. Bjorn Larson sent us an advanced copy of Creation, which is like if Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman got together to write Neil Gaiman's book on Norse mythology. It's very funny. I'm loving it a lot. So I'm not very far in, but he sent it and it kind of like jumped ahead of everything else that I was reading.
Yeah, me
I'm
too.
really happy to hear that.
I'm loving it. And it's nice because it's happy. It's not dark like his other book, which was also very, very good. But it was a little dark.
You just have to be in the right mood for
Yeah.
extreme genres like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, you sent me a little while ago recipes from the world of Tolkien, which I've been flipping through a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It's a recipe book, so I'm not exactly reading it. The only thing is, the subtitle is Inspired by the Legends, but if you read the foreword, it's actually just inspired by British recipes because the author decided that hobbits are British. That's not totally wrong. And therefore, they just eat a bunch of British food, and all of the recipes so far are just different ways to cook sausages.
I mean,
that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But,
I'm there.
yeah, so it's a little less whimsical than some of the other fantasy-inspired cookbooks I have.
Well, when I go and visit, I expect you to make me lots of sausages.
I have to.
Hobbit sausages.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But that's been fun. And it's beautiful. Anything with pictures and food, and I'm down. Well, Krystle, you are the one who suggested our topic for today. Would you like to introduce it?
So I pitched the idea of romantic fantasy and or romance in fantasy just because I feel like it gets a bad rap. And I feel like there's a lot of really amazing books that fall into the romantic fantasy genre. And it was just something Angela and I think about and talk about a lot because we get a lot of, I don't usually like romance, but in these two books.
I know that I've said that.
Yeah. And I'm always really curious to sit down with people and go, okay, so what is it that you don't usually like? Is it that you're reading stuff that isn't well done? Or is it?
That's what I assume. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
frankly.
because I will admit a lot of it is really ham-fisted and clumsy. And it does feel like people are putting it in their books because they feel like they have to. But I'd rather none than badly done romance. So.
Or slap it in the appendix like Tolkien did.
Footnotes, romance.
I wonder why it has a bad rap.
Yeah. By the way, they hook up.
Yeah.
So I was wondering why it has a bad rap, and I was also kind of like, no, me and Angela should be the champions now. Then if we get so many reviews that say I don't usually like romance, but in this book it worked for me.
But I liked your book.
And I'd like to spread the word that we're not that unusual. There's some really great stuff happening right now.
You use the term romantic fantasy, and how would you define romantic fantasy versus like romance in fantasy versus fantasy romance? Like
well, I'll let Angela talk about fantasy romance because I'm not super familiar with them, but she's read some or maybe a bunch or something.
Enough.
So, Angela.
I like fantasy romance, so I'm good to talk about it.
Yeah.
The difference is that fantasy romance follows the genre conventions of romance more than fantasy. So it's more about the romance, and it's more likely to have like happily ever after and, an HEA ending. It's more likely to just be focused on the two people or not necessarily even people, but because it's fantasy, right? Who are or maybe not two, but it focuses on the romance.
I thought that was going to be your caveat at first.
There are a lot anyway. But it focuses on the romance. That's the important part. It's the emotions of the characters involved. And that's what you're really reading for. You're like, are they going to get together or not? And so there are a lot of conventions in romance, like how they're constructed. You know that it's going to have a happy ending because romances do, but it's how they get to that ending. And there's always usually a moment toward the end where you're like, oh no, everything might be lost. How are they going to get out of this? They are. And that's good. And romantic fantasy isn't tied to that. It's more about the fantasy. And then the romance goes into the fantasy plot. And so lots more things can happen. It doesn't necessarily have to have a happy ending, or it could have a happy for now ending, or, it could be strung across 6 books or something. You could be trying to figure out who's gonna get together, but the fantasy is more emphasized.
It's a fantasy novel with a romance subplot,
right?
Perhaps.
Or even, I mean, the romance can be a pretty big part of it, but like Fortune's Fool, which is really a love story with a lot of blood and vomit, but
a lot of guns and swords, and
but it doesn't quite follow the conventions that would categorize something as a genre romance.
Excellent. I wonder how we would define the Charlaine Harris books. I'm trying to think. Those are really murder mysteries with a heavy dose of fantasy and romance underneath. Those are the True Blood books, for clarification.
I haven't read those.
I think I would call them murder mysteries rather than because
there's a lot of romance in them, but that's not the point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like the romance is secondary to the plot.
That's not the storyline that we follow from the book beginning to end, right? It's a murder mystery. Sookie just happens to be getting some the whole time.
Exactly.
That's important, though.
It makes it so much more fun.
Right.
And then also there's vampires tagging along. A lot of the conflict that we as readers are familiar with is sort of, Angela, what you mentioned before, the will they, won't they get together. But there is a whole lifetime of relationship after that point, theoretically. And we don't get to see that very often.
Yeah, I would say more so in romance and less so in romantic fantasy, because the romantic fantasy would give you the series and the lifetime of your characters for them to grow and figure each other out and come to know each other. And Outlander is a good example of that, because yes, the first book is the initial romance, but Angela, you were saying they're together into their 50s.
Yeah.
And they're still
the last book in the series, right, as of right now.
Yeah, so that would be an example of romantic fantasy where it's a stretch of a long lifetime of figuring out relationships. And it's what I'm really looking forward to writing in terms of my characters. Just, they had their first book and now they got to figure each other out in the midst of everything going on. And, people get the chance to grow together. And I think that's really, really great. And it doesn't have to be about the initial spark, which is a lot of fun to read about and write about. But there's more to love than, the initial chemical attraction. So I like the opportunity to read about and write about the exploration of people figuring each other out, and where one person ends and the other person begins, and also whether or not they even work. Like I like the possibility that some relationships don't survive, and it just gives you an opportunity to explore what that looks like on a human level, instead of just trying to fit things in to a genre need, if that makes sense.
I wonder how much of that is due to just the format of expectations in both genres. I think, and I don't read a lot of plain romance novels, so maybe I'm mistaken, but I feel like romance novels are often standalone or 2 books at best, maybe. Whereas with fantasy books, a lot of times you have a series, so you have the opportunity to explore the different levels of relationship in a way that you don't if you just have one book.
That's my perception as well. You'll have series, but even within the series, they'll jump between different POV characters, like within a family or something, because it needs to be a romance book. So it needs to have a beginning, a middle, a third act, disintegration, and then a happily ever after, or happily for now. And those are great. And I really enjoy them when I dip into that pond. But for me, when I'm writing, and usually when I'm reading, I like things to not have to serve a genre need. I like things just to be human. And I feel like...
No, I agree. It's that idea that the wedding is the goal, quote unquote.
Yeah, there's more.
Like you said, we see a lot in those genre conventions, but it's kind of a toxic mindset to be in. in real life. And so being able to have more examples of that, what does happily ever after actually look like?
Like work.
Yeah. And can you really summarize it into 3 words? No.
There's a lot of great books in the romance genre, and there's a lot of great fun to be had there. So I don't want to cast aspersions on an entire genre.
No, you're just saying get bigger, be more.
Yeah.
Do what you're doing now
exactly.
and also more. That's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I enjoy about reading romantic fantasy over fantasy romance. Angela reads both though, so she could probably speak to it better.
Yeah, I do read both. I mean, because that's kind of what I like. Like, I like a good fantasy romance every once in a while, like that just has the happily ever after. And you're like, okay, they got together. But I am also like a fantasy reader. Like, I was a fantasy reader first. And so I like series that are about like the same people following them for a long time, and fantasy romance is like romance in that sense, where if you have a fantasy romance series, it's usually, not always, but usually it's about people who are connected, but not the same people. And they'll show up throughout the series. So, you might have something about one couple in the first book, and then they get married and have kids or whatever, and then they'll show up in the second. So you're not like really leaving them behind, but you're not really following them either. And I don't know, personally, as far as my writing goes, I'd rather look at like the happily ever after, showing that it doesn't mean that your life is always happy after that.
Or easy.
It's a happily ever after in the sense that people are committed to each other and they stay committed to each other. So they have that kind of love and happiness, but it comes with challenges, that they then have to conquer as they go on before they really get a sense of, hey, they've really made a life together. And that's kind of the thing that I like.
Relationships take work.
Yeah. I like to see that in fiction.
Then Sarah, I'd love to open the floor to you, because you're one of the people that says I don't usually like it, but so I'd love to know what it is in other books that makes you go like, oh,
so
I wish they wouldn't.
I think that a lot of the times it feels ham-fisted and like it's being added just for the sake of adding romance. I also, part of my feeling comes from the fact that I just want to see more people like end up single and be happily single. There are a number of books that I've read recently where I'm like, just like, why do they need to be in a relationship? Just let them be single. Just let them, like, they were fine. They didn't need anyone. This just feels so out of left field. Like, I would rather it had not been included. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about Brightwash was that there's a lot of lead up and build up to the romance, and like it feels very real in a way that is often missed, I think, in at least the books that I have read.
I get the sense with some books that some editor told the writer, but you need to put in some romance so the ladies will read it. And I think you can tell when that was the case.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying with the ham-fisted.
It's like they're pandering to us.
Yeah. It also is like the female characters are there only to be love interests, and
Yes.
I would rather see them stand on their own.
I feel like that's a given.
Yeah, like they don't need, like, they should be there because they're awesome and doing things for the plot, not just so that they can serve as, the main characters
For the guy.
Even taking the gender dynamic out of it, which absolutely happens. But any time when the main character has a love interest who clearly that's their entire character, how can you be invested in their relationship? They're not a real person. They're,
they're just sort of like half formed.
Yeah, regardless of whether the main character is a man or a woman and the love interest is whatever. It's just, I can't care about them getting together because I don't care about half of them.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's just the lack of characters that feel fully human. So then when they start smashing people together, it just feels like
Arbitrary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
That makes
also,
sense.
it also bothers me more in movies, I think, than it actually does in books. Like I was thinking about this earlier, and I think at least on the page, you have more insight into a character's perspective, whereas with a movie, it's just like you don't get any of that internal dialogue and growth, and you just like they go from meeting to banging, and there's really no in between that you can see. And you get more of that development in novels than you do
or
in
TV series.
or TV series where you have just a longer period of time to work with.
Yeah, movies are just so accelerated in what the boxes they're trying to tick that sometimes it's hard to. Yeah, that makes sense too. I like the rise of the streaming platform TV series. I feel like it's doing really good things for fiction in televised form because they're getting the chance to tell big sprawling stories instead of movies getting so much.
You get an arc, like an emotional arc. And I think that's what you were responding to, Sarah. It's just like if a book lacks that space for emotional setup, like even if they met and it was like a one night stand or something, you're trying to make me believe that they're like instantly in love with each other. That's a really tough sell. But if that kind of led to more emotions, like being stretched out over the course of, a whole novel, the romance is not at the beginning. The romance comes as the relationship develops as part of the relationships. Sometimes you can see where things are plotted out. This is a character type, this is the hero or the love interest. And I don't know, as a writer, sometimes you get a sense of like, as a character writer, sometimes you get a sense of these two people want to be together and you're like, okay, good. But in your head as a writer, like a lot more than the reader sees on the page. And so like you put it on the page and people go, I don't know if I buy this yet. And you're like, okay, I got to go do more work.
I got to set this up better.
Krystle, were you going to point out the difference between a one night stand and love at first sight?
Yeah, see, and that's another thing. The type of romance and or love and or sex says a lot about the character if you let it, because if they're going in for the one night stands, it says something, nothing inherently negative, but something, that they're comfortable enough with themselves to smash it out with somebody they just met. And when we set up these things happening, it can be an exercise in character development, just like a fight or a big political scene or any of that. If the writer gives themselves the room and the time to explore what that means for the characters involved, which is why I like it as a tool to get to know the people, because the choices they make says something. Good or bad, it doesn't matter, but something if you give it the time.
The character who has a one night stand and the character who falls in love at first sight are totally different character types.
Different.
And there might be one who falls in love at first sight, but you got to do a lot of work in that one to make it actually not just believable, but to fit with the, it has to be like a point that you talk about.
There's also whether or not that love bears out as they get to know the person.
Right. It could be unrequited.
Well, and also like they fall in love at first sight and then they get to know the person and go, how are my priorities? Maybe this was a bad idea. Like, that's interesting.
That's true. A character declaring that they are in love at first sight is different from the author trying to get me to believe that they are truly in love.
That's exactly right.
First sight. So the difference between a character's experience and the author's intentions are, so important for every book, but especially in romance or any kind of really close interpersonal discussion like romance tends to be. Is there any romance with oneself? I don't know if that book's been written yet.
I guess.
Would it count if you are in love with a clone of yourself?
That's still another person.
Yeah,
that's.
I can think of
a lot.
I have seen that fan fiction.
Oh, sure. So everyone's seen that fan fiction. This is not exactly on topic, but I realized after I made this comment that I was using fantasy in the fantastical meaning, not as in the genre of fantasy. But I consider all erotica to be fantasy on some level, just because it's never how it works. And that's fine. We can all agree we're having a good time. We're not here for a realistic diagram. Who cares? But that's not like the genre of fantasy.
The fantasy erotica gets some pretty wild ideas.
Absolutely. But I mean, like, even literary fiction erotica. Has that sentence ever been uttered before?
Intellectual erotica.
Now there's an erotica author. She's on Wattpad. She publishes her stuff on. She's an excellent writer. Like, these are amazing books. It's Wolf's Wife is like the first one, and her pseudonym is Julie Midnight, but they are excellent fantasy horror books. So the fantasy horror plot, and they have werewolves, but they're like mythological werewolves. They're not like your generic werewolves, but it's definitely erotica. So that's their short book, but it's she's an awesome writer. She's really good, but it kind of mixes up. So you can do it all, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. I've read me some fantasy erotica, don't you worry. I guess the point I was making is that as a genre, erotica is not usually hyper realistic.
No.
There are almost always fantastical elements to those scenes, just for the ease of reading, for the fun of it, but that's different from fantasy as a genre. Fantastical and fantasy. I found some works that try to be hyper realistic, and they are refreshing. The awkward stumbling, things aren't working quite right, not exactly how you expected, which is much more realistic than everything is great and perfect on the first try. But it's a different niche.
Yeah.
They're fun to write.
Yeah.
Those kinds of encounters are a lot of fun.
I don't know. I guess I just like to write more realistic characters in general, but I also like humor and the stuff I read and the stuff I write. So that's a lot more fun than I saw a review once of Kushil's Dart where they talked about how she had ballet sex. Like, that was like, she went off and, that was because everything was perfect and ideal. And she was really good at it, right? Because that was her thing. But I don't know. Because sometimes you look at something and you're like, I'm not buying this. This doesn't happen.
I think for Kushil's Dart, the thing that I'm not buying first is not the perfect sex.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
I just
Sarah's got a list.
I could go off on the Hobbit adaptation, but I don't have to. I can save that for a Hobbit.
I'm happy to talk about Tauriel.
Well, okay, the thing about Tauriel from the Hobbit movie adaptations is I feel like people approached her character from the fatigue of there have been so many movies out that have pointless love interests and love triangles that are forced and just for the sake of saying, oh yeah, we included one of these in the movie. That idea of pandering and including this just to tick a box, right? But I don't think Tauriel is that in the Hobbit movies. First of all, she's not even really in a love triangle. Like, it's not.
I also think that a lot of, and this is not I don't know how to phrase this in a way that doesn't sound like I'm attacking her character, because I don't mind her character, but I think a lot of people took issue with her because she's not in the books.
Oh, you got to get over that.
I know. No, I mean,
I know, not you. Yeah.
People. Yeah, a book and a movie are not the same storytelling device.
Well, if they hadn't included her, everyone would be saying, well, they made this book with no or this movie with no female characters, which I think is probably the greater sin.
Although, to hear, if I recall correctly, to hear the actress talk about it when she was signing on to do it, she was like, I don't want to be a romantic element. And they told her, yeah, that's fine. That's not the plan. But then they did the movies, and then they went back and they said, we're going to film a bunch of new scenes. And so they went back and filmed all of her romance stuff, and she was kind of devastated that they were now forcing her to do this. So on that note, I feel like, yeah, girl.
Oh, that's
that
a bummer
sucked.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is maybe a meta conversation about the movie industry. And I can't even begin to get into that.
Yeah. But again, it is the thing where it's like, got it, that's our purpose. Okay, thanks for the reminder.
At least they had Galadriel too, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not dissing the movies overall. I liked them. I did like them.
Enjoyed them.
It's just yeah. But it's just that I think stuff like that is why a lot of people feel like, well, I don't like romance, because it's the reminder that that's our purpose as female
just
human
put
bodies.
stuff in because it's like, we don't have any of this, so we need to put it in because it should be there because we have a female character. And
that's interesting, because I usually hear that from men, that they don't like romance, and that including romance ruins the story. And then, of course, the next sentence is, so why even have the female character in it, which is a whole different bucket of worms.
I'm not sure. I got a 50-50 split on people that said I don't usually like romance, but it was a pretty even split between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it comes from a similar place. Although, see, I'm careful about what I say because I don't want to insult the people that took the time to review books. So maybe all of this will be cut out. But it feels like women who read fantasy are trying to escape from the daily misogyny that they have to deal with. And so when they say I don't usually like romance, it's because I don't usually like seeing women used so cheaply. Whereas for men, it's like I don't usually like romance because that's girly stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So they're overcoming the same thing, but it just feels different because they're on different ends of that objectification, where men are told they're not supposed to like emotional stuff and smooching, and women are told that that's all we are.
Right. Well, how can you blame guys when all they see are the really poorly done ones? Right.
That too.
Also, there's a lot of, like, it's hard to escape and speaking as someone who would like a little bit less romance, I want to actively choose to read it. Like, it shows up a lot in books that are ostensibly not romance, unrelated to romance. And so I want it to be my decision to read romance. But this is a personal thing. Like, I'm just not, tends not to be what interests me the most. So,
well, one of the other things I appreciated about the Hobbit movies was the friendship between Legolas and Tauriel. And it's kind of introduced as his dad assuming they were into each other, but there's not really any actual romance in between those characters at all through the entire series. He respects her and trusts her and follows her into battle, which felt, I don't know, like good friends.
Better than what we usually get.
Yeah, well, and that's why I push back against the criticism that Tauriel was just a cheap love triangle. Because there really was no triangle there. Legolas goes out of his way to save the quote-unquote competitor for her affections. Like, that's not a love triangle, I don't think.
I'm trying to remember the movies now.
No,
okay.
I have to confess, I don't know. Like, we watched the Hobbit movies when we were
when they came out.
It was like all of them together, and I had a bunch of kids climbing over me. So,
well, there is definitely flirting between Tauriel and Keely, which is the romance line that people take issue with, and that didn't bother me too much. It didn't feel. It's not love at first sight, right? There's kind of flirty. That's cute. That's fine.
Yeah, it was an accelerated enemies to lovers.
Yeah.
Without them actually getting to be lovers.
Yeah.
Oh well. if you're gonna go all the way, like whatever.
And yeah, I don't know. A lot of the criticisms for her in those movies felt like people were criticizing other movies and didn't bother to look into the shades of gray. How is this quote unquote love triangle different from the Hunger Games or whatever the other ones are, Twilight? Is that just because there are two men who are both friendly with one female character doesn't make it a love triangle?
Well, that's one of the things that it's revealing of the person that's taking umbrage with the situation, because it's like, if you see a man and a woman being friendly to each other and assume that the only reason the man is doing that is because he's in love with her, that says a lot about you as a person rather than the actual involved.
Absolutely. And I wonder, all of the people who complain about introducing this new character, they hide behind, purity to the books, or to the book in this case. But, they're just annoyed that there was a female character in the movie.
That kicked ass.
She was great, yeah. And it made sense. Like, it wasn't so forced. Of course, there would have been an elf captain of the guard. So it's not like they completely fabricated a whole person. We just saw more of her. She could have been in the book and just not named. We don't know. Anyway, that's all. I feel like people are too hard on that character because they're taking out other movies on her. People
do generally tend to be hard on female romantic characters, as Angela can attest to with poor Kira.
Yeah, she takes a lot of heat sometimes.
Does Kira get shit?
Yeah, she does actually, because it's tough. I'm not the only person has written a complicated female protagonist who's had difficulties, because they're held to really high standards. Like female protagonists, I think, are, especially female readers, they don't really want to read like other female characters who make really bad decisions, and she makes some really bad decisions, and she does
make some bad decisions. I haven't finished the book.
Yeah,
I'm in the middle of it. But
how old is she though?
Right, because when she makes that bad decision, she's only like 16. But right.
But even when she's a mercenary, so
she is, by the present narrative of the book, she's 25. So yeah.
Like, how many 25-year-olds do you know that totally have their shit together? Like, honestly.
I
did not when I was 25.
But yeah, she takes a little heat, but it's one of those things too, where sometimes people don't want to look at the romance in that part, because a tough female protagonist, I think sometimes it's hard for people to reconcile the fact that a woman she's disguised as a man, right? And she's living her life as a mercenary, could also want a family and children. And I think that makes, because there were a lot of books written, in response to, especially in the 80s, I think it started, and these were good, where writers were responding to, they were challenging gender roles. So they were taking female characters and they had them trying to get out of arranged marriages, or, we don't like to sew, I want to wear pants. You know what I mean? Like in fantasy. And those were good. Like, I grew up on them. I read them, and it was good as a girl to see these people, because, in TV at that time when I was growing up, female characters there weren't any that you could really, in 80s TV was like a wasteland as far as good female role models in TV shows. But we had like Robin McKinley writing The Hero and The Crown and The Blue Sword, and
yes. I
those
read
those were the books.
Yeah.
I mean, they were inspiring. But as things develop, like, you want women who are allowed to experience everything, like that they can be whole people, right? So you can have a woman who wants to have a family and children and a romance, and fall in love
and kick ass,
and also be treated respectfully as a competent person, and I think sometimes it's hard for people to reconcile that. Like sometimes for some people, they think that because of the fact that she's torn, between the two things, that it makes her look weak in some ways. Most people, I think, get it. Most people do, but occasionally there's somebody who doesn't. My male readers are funny though, because most of them are, I have gotten a lot of reviews. I really didn't think I like romance, but I like this book, and sometimes it's followed by, and now I have to like rethink my whole, philosophy of reading life. But it's I like those reviews. It makes me feel good, but I do get them from women too. Usually I don't like romance because there's a lot of like it just seems sappy, or like it's not giving the female character enough agency, or it's not put together right. But I liked yours because it seemed realistic, like your characters actually talk to each other about stuff and things like that. So
it also sounds like pushback against the idea that strength is masculine.
Yeah, right.
When we first started seeing female characters that had some agency, they then had to be masculine. Right. Yeah. But then the idea that you can have not just physical strength, but a strong character who is still feminine, or a mix between the two, or, more complex.
Well, then emotions aren't gendered.
Right. But when you see someone when you hear someone say that character felt weak because they wanted a deep emotional life, yeah. I think maybe they thought that.
Well, and it's also like, I think romance becomes the microcosm of gender expression as a whole, because of the emotionality of it, because fantasy tends to be quite gendered in its heroes and what a hero looks like, and gendered in what romance looks like too, where that's the part that's soft and sappy and weak. And so romantic fantasy tends to try to push back at that idea that men can be emotional and women can be whatever, tough and emotional, and men can be, humans are multifaceted things, and the inclusion and or absence of romance does not retract from their complexity. Mm-hmm. It only adds. And that's what I really champion for. Because a character that is not interested in romance, that's a complex thing. Like, explore it, talk about it, let them be
full characters,
full people, fully human. Right. Like, I can't think of any offhand. I really can't.
But there's also the idea that the only intimate relationship traditionally men can have is with a romantic interest.
Yeah. And
then you see it with Lord of the Rings, right? People making fun of Sam and Frodo because they must have been romantically interested in each other.
Well, that I think that goes both ways. I think because it's like the people who are wanting queer representation are grasping at straws,
right?
But then on the flip side of that, people who are wanting toxic masculinity are kicking against it because they're like, no, men don't act like that. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's like the worst of both worlds in a way, where people who want to be seen as complex humans are like, yes, give me, please. And then people that are uncomfortable with the emotionality are like, mm-hmm. hateful.
Yeah. I think you can tell the difference between them just by the way they phrase it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
They cared about each other so much. That's so sweet. I hope the best for them. Versus, whatever. They were just gay. Yeah. There's different ways to explore a relationship. Yeah. But it is also nice to see, intimacy, non-romantic intimacy between characters.
Well, and also queer intimacy.
Oh, yes.
I
both and all, or intimacy between a woman and a lesbian character, and they don't have to be romantic. Just because she's a lesbian doesn't mean she loves her. There's so many angles.
I feel like romance is the foot in the door mm-hmm. for talking about emotions and interpersonal relationships and different kinds of intimacy and love, different kinds of love, because love is such an intense thing, but it's not always romantic. And having the chance to explore those is really fun. But then romance gets us in the door.
Yeah.
It gets us like, okay, so we're talking about this now. Thanks. So
it's the green flag for mushy stuff.
Right.
But I wish that it didn't have to be, because as someone who's not, like in my personal life, not particularly interested in romance, like I want all of the intimacy and discussions of intimacy. I just don't like, I want both. I want everything.
Yeah. Well, and having to choose one or the other is doing a disservice to everybody, because like in your experience, where it's like it's so ham-fisted that it takes away now, or it's so over the top that it's not interesting anymore. But I think hopefully, I certainly in the indie scene, there's some really amazing things going on now as far as really complex human characters. So hopefully that's a trend that's moving towards just letting people be people and letting people express themselves. So hopefully we're moving in the right direction. It seems like we are, but maybe I'm just really picky and I'm reading all the right books.
I mean, I think that we are. I think it's slow, but there is progress.
Well, just from a standpoint of accessibility, there are so many independent publishing options available now that we just have more variety, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of romantic fantasy tends to be epic as well, because in epic fantasy, you have a spread to do a lot, like in the Inda books. So there's a lot of different relationships there. So you can have, like, you have multi-point of view. You can have one romantic relationship, and you can have another relationship between characters that's entirely, that's a friendship that is deeply explored. You can do it all. I like epic fantasy that does it all. You're looking at the whole human experience. You've got this giant palette, this giant canvas that you can work with. And it just seems small to limit it to, like to say, oh, we can only have this kind of romance and it can only be this big. It can only take up, like 25% of the novel, or we can only have, if we have a romance, then we can't do anything else. We have to just focus on the romance, and it has to be everything. I don't know. I like both things, because Fortune's Fool is epic and it's focused on a romance. But then the book I'm working on now has a lot of different people.
And there's Razzie.
Oh yeah, you have him too. But
yeah, Fortune's Fool is a great example of all the different kinds of love that can exist between people, for sure. And then Dreams too. Dreams is an amazing example of emotionality between
working on it.
Is Dreams the new Portal fantasy that you have coming out?
Dreams So Dark is the title, and hopefully, I don't know exactly when, but it's forthcoming. Just put it that way.
It's amazing.
But it is that kind of thing. So it's different than Fortune's Fool in that it is a little bit more like the Inda books, in that there are a bunch of different characters that relate to each other in totally different ways. So you have, two characters might have a romance, but in that book, friendship is the bigger relationship. That is what it's focused on. And some of the other things are just subplots. So, but that's what I like. Like, if you have all that space, you have that epic, you have politics and people and humans and, characters bouncing off each other, and they're in these extraordinary circumstances, and there's magic and stuff. It just seems like you got to go for it, push it to the wall and see what happens.
It's nice to explore the breadth of experiences as they relate to relationships. Yeah.
It has that massive epic sprawl to it, where multiple cultures and multiple different kinds of love and different people. And I'm really excited for it. I am the #1 marketing executive on that book. I can't wait to talk about it to people that also read
it. Working on it. I'm trying.
I'm
really
excited to read it.
Hard.
It sounds. Yeah.
I would like to be finished.
It sounds fantastic.
Okay, so I haven't read Inda, by Sherwood Smith. But I do remember the first time, it was probably my first, that's not true. Tamora Pierce books had some romance in them, but they weren't really the focus for the most part.
It depends on the Tamora Pierce book.
Yeah, okay. They weren't my focus at the time. But Sherwood Smith's book, Crown Duel, which had the sequel Court Duel, except my copy was just one big book. I didn't realize there were 2 books in it, and I was so confused when suddenly Crown Duel was over and the war part was done, and suddenly she was in a court and doing court lady stuff, and I was like, what is happening? But that book,
it's almost like there's 2 books here.
That went way over my head at the time.
Well, because you were probably pretty young when you read that.
Was that middle school? I was 11, maybe 12. I was a kid.
I was going to say you were, I would have thought younger, because that's probably a book that I suggested to you. And I would think that I was like 10 or 11 when I read it.
Who knows when I read it then?
Yeah.
But there is a pretty strong romance line in Court Duel. And I think that was the first time that I was like, oh, this is great.
And see, that's a romance that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
As a child.
It's a lot of political intrigue.
There is political intrigue, but there's also a lot of build up to the romance itself. So it's like you do get the sense that these characters really have had the chance to fall in love with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fair to say for you, Sarah, the deciding factor is whether or not it feels properly explored and fully human. Like,
I think that's a big part of it, but the other part is that I want to see more than just romance. I want the book to explore other kinds of relationships, and if it's just romance, maybe not. But if it's romance and other emotional connections that don't involve a romantic relationship, then I'm like, yes, give me the romance and everything else.
But you also read erotic fan fiction, don't you?
I do read erotic fan fiction.
But just because you're
feeling saucy.
I like the erotica aspect of it, but it's a chance to explore the characters as well. I mean, when done right.
Yeah.
But that's always the huge caveat, right?
That. Yeah, so it's the same
when
thing.
Done right.
Yeah.
And I think maybe to paraphrase Sarah, you don't like it when the romantic relationship feels incidental.
I want the emotional connection.
You want it to be earned.
Yeah.
But at a lot of times when maybe I'm pulling more on movies than books here, but characters will get together at the end just because, there's an even number of characters. Guess they are pairing off for the epilogue, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's when you start to go, I don't know. It's kind of like they're playing with, cardboard people. You've got, the characters aren't realized enough for you to believe that this would really happen. You don't know enough about them to know, would they really be attracted to this person? They have enough interactions with them to really do that, or what's going on here? And then, that's not very satisfying to me either.
Yeah,
exactly.
I just want a more in-depth exploration than what we often get in movies.
Well, so I would argue you prefer romance to books with romance thrown in at the end for exactly that reason.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Yeah. You want it to be done
justice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I also do want more just characters who have emotional connections but are single.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see that enough. Or I don't see that enough. I want the emotional relationship without necessarily a physical one.
Cass has your back.
We did just read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and that has some really, really lovely friendships in it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all. I really love that book. I'm going to bring it up forever now.
It's on my TBR, but I haven't read it yet.
Chambers, isn't it?
One of those things that I've been meaning to read it for a really long time. As one does.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
Definitely worth it though.
We need to get working on that eighth
Oh, no
day of the
kidding.
week
The
where
time portal.
there's no
Right.
children allowed.
Time portal to the library where I can just sit and read,
Yeah.
then come out.
No
Right.
children
Yeah.
allowed unless they're reading, and no work. Just
Yep.
leave me alone. I'm reading. Eighth day
Comfortable
of the week.
Only.
Yeah.
Well, the secret is start a podcast, and then I can say, "Sorry, entire household, I have to read for my podcast right now.
Well, it
I'm on a
probably
schedule."
also means that Angela and I spend less time writing our books, which I don't think is
Yeah.
something we're willing to do.
I
Only
don't
so
like
many
that
hours in
option.
the day. Yeah.
So that's not going to work for me.
Yeah. It's tough though, because you gotta I gotta read to pollinate my mind. If I don't read enough, then I'm not
Yeah, you gotta
my
refill.
writing kind of suffers. But on the other hand, and writing can just suck up every moment. I mean, I wish it did.
I went the longest time without reading anything except beta reading, because I would read a page or so and then my eyes would kind of slide off the page and I'd start thinking about that one plot point that was really bugging me. So reading Kitchen Confidential has been really nice because it's oh, finally I can read again. I think I read 2 books in all of 2020. That's what my Goodreads says. I read 1 fantasy book and 1 Vietnam War book, and that's it. That's all I managed. So yeah, I'd love more time to read, but my brain is occupied.
Try to take a couple of days when I finish a draft, if I ever finish a draft, which I'm not sure I'll ever finish this draft, but I'd save books. And I'm okay, I'm going to take 2, because then I wander around aimlessly when I finish. I know there's something I should be doing, but I don't have anything to do. I don't know what it is. So so right now I'm saving Ursula Vernon. She actually writes fantasy romances as T. Kingfisher, which are amazing. And so I'm saving the next. There's Paladin's Grace, and I forget what the second one's called, but I'm saving the second one.
I've heard good things about Paladin's Grace. I read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by her, which was a lot of fun.
I love her books. I love all of them. I haven't read A Wizard's Guide, but Paladin's Grace was really good. And she calls it a fluffy romance with severed heads, and that's basically what it is. It was right up my alley. I just love it.
That's very on brand for you too.
It is. And she just does everything so well. She does fantasy, she does the romance, her humor is just, the only problem is I read them so fast that then they're done. And I'm couldn't it take less time to read this book?
I have a bunch waiting for me for when I have room in my brain. I have Susanna Rowntree's books. I have 2, the first 2. And then I have the new one by Hannah Whitten, For the Wolf.
Oh, I've heard good things about that.
Yeah, I heard really good things about it too, where the love interest does the lonely, isolated guy trope without him being a jerk.
I would like to read that.
Which was another thing that I was wondering, I wonder if one of the reasons people don't like romance is because one or both of the parties are so awful that you don't care. And then I also got Song of Achilles for similar reasons, but I can't read. I can't read right now. I just can't do it.
Well, hopefully we can all find time for all of our various and sundry hobbies soon.
Oh, God.
That's the best blessing I can think of.
I just want to finish this book.
Yeah, I need a time portal to finish the drafts. That's what I need the time portal for.
Yeah. That makes sense. Just freeze time so that we can finish. And then we can go on with our regular lives.
Just give me an extra 3 months or so.
Yeah.
So Krystle and Angela, thank you guys so much for coming on. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're currently working on and where you can be found on the internet? I can be found on the internet. I'm on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Angela Boord. My website is just angelaboord.com. Right now, I am currently working on, I have 2 books open, kind of, that I'm hoping to finish one day. I have Dream So Dark, which is a
Cold War portal fantasy, epic fantasy. I kind of like to say it's got a little bit of everything in it. It's got a kind of an urban fantasy stuck inside an epic fantasy. And then I also am working on the sequel to Fortune's Fool, which will be Fool's Promise. And so those 2 books will come out when I finish with them. And it may be Through Dreams So Dark will come out first, and Fool's Promise will come out sometime after that. So I'm working on them.
Both very big, and they're both very good, no matter what Angela says.
They're just difficult. And they're difficult children.
But they're very good.
But yeah, I'm excited about them both, and hopefully they'll be, I am working on both of them at the same time, kind of. So they'll eventually both of them be.
I'm looking forward to reading both of them.
Thanks.
I'm looking forward to reading them again because they've changed so much since the last time.
Yeah, you get to read them whether you want to or not.
Deal. I want to.
I'm sending them to you.
I like how she says it like a threat.
Well, I don't know. They keep getting bigger, so it might be a threat.
But they're really good.
A lot of words, though.
Yeah, well, I'm also working on a lot of words. I'm working on this sequel to Brightwash, which is going to be called Legacy of Brick and Bone. I also don't know when it'll be ready because I'm also stuck in revision hell, trying to sort all this stuff out. But it's going to be a lot of words, and they're going to be good words when I'm done with them. And then, so my Twitter handle is @Krystle Matar. I'm on Instagram, also @Krystle Matar, and my website is krystlematar.com. So cashing in on the unusual name, I can get all of that stuff without numbers or anything. And that's it. Yeah, that's all I have. That sounds great.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram @FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.